In the quiet corners of the world, where faith is as tangible as the mountain air, some lines are never meant to be crossed. This is a story of one man who crossed that line, and the echo that followed, an echo that sounded like fire. If you believe in the power of the unseen, if you cherish tales that linger long after they're told, then make sure to like and subscribe so you don't miss a single one of our stories. The first plume of smoke rose against the bruised purple of a Colorado twilight, a thin gray finger pointing accusingly at the heavens. It wasn't the familiar, comforting scent of pinon wood from a fireplace or the hazy curtain of a controlled burn in the distant national forest. This smoke carried within it the acrid, plastic, sweet smell of melting resin and the ancient, sorrowful sigh of charring wood. From their porches and kitchen windows, the people of St. Helena watched, their evening routines frozen, their hearts thumping a silent, collective dirge. They knew, without a single word being spoken, what was burning. Their lady was dying. For nearly 70 years, the statue of the Virgin Mary had stood on a granite outcropping overlooking the valley they called the Lap of St. Helena. She was not an ostentatious thing, this Madonna of the Rockies. Carved from a single ancient ponderosa pine by a grieving Italian immigrant named Alfonso Rossi in 1953, she was life-sized, her features softened by decades of sun, wind, and blizzard. Her paint was faded, her hands chipped from countless touches, her gaze perpetually cast down upon the town with a weary, loving kindness. She was a landmark, a confidant, a silent witness to generations of joy and heartbreak. Teenagers had their first awkward kisses in her shadow. Old miners would touch her base and murmur a prayer for safety before heading into the treacherous depths of the Earthlight silver mine. Widows would leave wildflowers at her feet. She was woven into the very fabric of the place, a thread of the divine in the rugged, everyday tapestry of their lives. And now, Pastor Robert Carter was burning her. He stood before a barrel fire in the newly graveled parking lot of his Crystal River megachurch, a structure of gleaming steel and glass that looked less like a house of worship and more like a corporate headquarters dropped from orbit onto the edge of the sleepy town. He held a gasoline can loosely in one hand. His posture was not one of rage, but of chilling, performative certainty. He wore his signature crisp black suit, his hair was perfectly styled, and a wireless microphone was clipped to his lapel, amplifying his voice so it rolled across the valley like the voice of God himself. "We do not worship idols," he boomed, his voice a weapon of polished steel. "We do not bow down to graven images crafted by the hands of men. This thing is an abomination. A remnant of papist superstition that has held this valley in spiritual bondage for generations. It is a stumbling block, a false gateway that leads souls away from the pure, unadulterated truth of Jesus Christ." A small cluster of his followers, perhaps 50 people, most of them new faces who had followed him from Texas or California, drawn by his slick online sermons and promises of prosperity, stood watching their faces, a mixture of fervor and uncertainty. They murmured "Amen" and praised Jesus, but their eyes were fixed on the flames, on the dark shape within that was slowly losing its form. The townspeople, however, kept their distance. They stood in small, silent clusters along the old mine road, their faces pale in the dying light. There was old Father O'Malley, the retired Catholic priest from the tiny historic St. Dismas parish. His knobby hands clenched so tight around his cane, his veins stood out like blue cords. There was Maria Flores, Alfonso Rossi's 78-year-old granddaughter. Her face wet with silent tears she didn't bother to wipe away. There was Ben Walker, the town's sheriff, a pragmatic man not given to flights of fancy, who simply looked on with a deep, unsettling frown, his arms crossed over his broad chest. "He can't do this," whispered Ellie Jenkins, who ran the town's only bookstore. "It's on private land, the diocese, the historical society." "He bought the land last week," Ben said, his voice low and gravelly. The outcropping, the access road, all of it, paid old man Henderson a fortune. It's his property. He can burn what he wants on it. But it's her, Maria Flores said, her voice breaking. My nonno. He carved her after the mine collapse. He prayed to Our Lady for my father, his son, who was trapped underground for 3 days. They said it was a miracle he lived. He carved her as a thank you, a protector. In the barrel, the statue gave a loud crack, a sound like a bone breaking. The head, its serene face now blackened and blistered, listed to one side before toppling into the heart of the inferno. A collective gasp, a soft, mournful exhalation went through the crowd of locals. It felt like a death. Pastor Carter saw it. He smiled, a wide, white televangelist smile. See, it is just wood. It has no power. It cannot save itself, much less you. Today, we reclaim this valley for the one true God, a God of fire and spirit. He raised the gas can and poured the last of the accelerant onto the pyre. The flames roared skyward, swallowing the last remnants of the Virgin Mary, turning 70 years of devotion and memory into ash and smoke. The smoke climbed high into the darkening sky, a stain against the first emerging stars. As the fire began to die down, leaving only embers and a twisted metal armature, an unexpected thing happened. The wind, which had been still all evening, picked up. It swept down from the high peaks, cool and sharp, and it caught the great plume of ash and smoke, spinning it into a vortex before carrying it east. Across the valley, directly toward the one structure that gleamed brighter than any other, the massive, brand-new mountain mansion of Pastor Robert Carter. It was a coincidence, a trick of the topography. Every rational mind present knew that. But as the grey ash settled like a shroud over the mansion's polished cedar siding, its titanium roof, its immaculate acres of landscaped lawn, a deep, superstitious chill settled over the people of St. Helena. They turned away from the dying fire, from the triumphant pastor, and headed home in a silence that was heavier than any prayer. No one said it, not out loud, but the thought was there, hanging in the air as palpable as the smell of smoke that would linger over the town for days. It looked like a curse. The next 3 days in St. Helena passed under a pall. It wasn't just the smell, though that was persistent, a ghost of burnt plastic and pine that seeped into curtains and clung to clothes. It was a mood, a pressure, a collective holding of breath. The town felt wrong, off-kilter, as if a fundamental law of nature, as reliable as gravity, had been subtly repealed. The first incident was small, almost silly. The following morning, a Tuesday, Pastor Carter emerged from his mansion to find his fleet of vehicles, a black Mercedes G-Wagon, a white BMW sedan, and a massive custom-built Ford Raptor, utterly dead. Not a flicker of life in any of them. His mechanics, summoned from Grand Junction, were baffled. The batteries were fine, the alternators were fine. There was no electrical fault they could find. It was as if the very spark of life had been sucked out of them. Carter, fuming, had to be driven to his midweek service in a borrowed pickup truck from one of his acolytes, a humiliation he did not take well. That same afternoon, the town's oldest resident, 99-year-old Mabel Gunderson, who had been born in the lap and had never left, woke from her afternoon nap and announced to her startled nurse, "The lady is gone. The mountain is crying." She refused to elaborate, and by evening she had developed a fever of unknown origin. Dr. Evans, the town physician, was stumped. It wasn't the flu, it wasn't an infection. It was just a deep, unexplained heat that radiated from her frail body. On Wednesday, the strangeness escalated. A construction crew working on the final additions to the megachurch, a state-of-the-art broadcasting studio, reported a series of bizarre accidents. No one was seriously hurt, but it was enough to spook the hardened crew. A perfectly secure ladder came away from a wall as if pushed. A brand new coil of copper wiring, stored securely in a locked trailer, was found inexplicably unraveled and tangled into a shape that several workers, crossing themselves, muttered looked like a rosary. The project foreman, a no-nonsense man from Denver, was heard on the phone saying, "I don't know, man. This job is just cursed. Things keep going wrong." But it was the dreams that truly began to unnerve people. It started with the children. Little Sarah Jenkins, Ellie's daughter, woke up screaming Wednesday night, sobbing about a beautiful lady who was on fire. She said the lady wasn't angry, just sad, and that she was looking for her home. 2 other children in the neighborhood reported identical dreams that night. Then the adults began to dream. Maria Flores dreamed of her grandfather, Alfonso Rossi, standing by his carving bench, weeping tears of sap. Sheriff Ben Walker, who hadn't remembered a dream in 20 years, woke with a start at 3 a.m., his heart hammering, the image of a single unblinking eye carved from ponderosa pine seared onto his mind. Even agnostics and atheists in town reported restless nights, a feeling of profound loss upon waking, a sense that something precious had been mislaid. Father O'Malley, in his small cottage behind the shuttered St. Dismas Church, received visitors. They came quietly, almost shamefacedly, asking for a blessing, for someone to talk to. They spoke of their dreams, their unease. "It's just guilt, son," he told Ben Walker, who had stopped by under the pretense of checking on the old man. "A shared trauma. The mind processes these things in strange ways." Ben shook his head, staring into the cup of tea the priest had given him. "Maybe, but my truck started just fine this morning. My dog hasn't been sleeping. He sits at the door and whines all night, looking toward the mountain. That's not guilt, Father, that's something else." O'Malley sighed, the weight of his years pressing down on him. "This valley has always been a thin place, Benjamin. The Celts had a term for it. Places where the veil between this world and the next is whisper thin. The Utes who first lived here wouldn't build their lodges in the lap. They said it was watched over by a spirit of mercy. That's why Alfonso put her there. He felt it too." He looked out the window toward the blackened scar on the mountainside. "When you tear down a symbol, you don't destroy what it represents, you just unleash it." Meanwhile, at the mansion on the hill, Robert Carter was dismissive, even triumphant. At his Wednesday evening service, he addressed the rumors head-on. "I hear the whispers," he declared, pacing the stage with theatrical energy. "I hear the superstitious mumblings of the faithless. They say there's a curse. They say bad luck has followed our bold stand for truth." He stopped and faced his congregation, his face beaming from the giant screens. "Praise God. Of course the devil is angry. When you strike a blow against the kingdom of darkness, it fights back. Those car troubles, spiritual warfare, those bad dreams, the enemy attacking your peace, stand firm. This is not a time for fear, it is a time for faith. God is testing us, and He will reward our faithfulness." He pointed a finger toward the ceiling. "My house is not just a house, it is a beacon. It was built with the tithes and offerings of faithful believers, and it is covered by the blood of Jesus. No weapon formed against it shall prosper. What can man do to me?" His followers erupted in applause and cheers, their doubts washed away in a wave of fervent rhetoric. Carter fed them a narrative they were hungry to consume. They were spiritual warriors, under attack because they were winning. But away from the cameras and the adulation, in the deep silence of his cavernous home, was he quite so sure? His housekeeper, a quiet woman named Lupe who lived in town, would later tell Sheriff Walker that on that Wednesday night she had come back to retrieve a purse she'd forgotten. She'd let herself in with her key and heard the pastor's voice. He wasn't preaching. He was on the phone, and his voice was low, sharp, and laced with an anxiety she'd never heard before. "Just birds, for God's sake. I don't care what it looked like. Just get it cleaned up before tomorrow." She had hurried out, not wanting to be caught eavesdropping. But the next morning, when she arrived for work, She saw what he had been talking about. The entire western facade of the mansion, the wall of floor-to-ceiling windows that looked out toward the site of the burning, was spattered with long, dark streaks. It looked like mud, but it wasn't. A flock of starlings had, for reasons unknown, flown directly into the glass. Dozens of them. The cleaners were already there, power washing the gruesome evidence away. The third day, Thursday, dawned unnervingly still and hot for late September. The air was thick, oppressive, carrying the promise of a thunderstorm that never quite materialized. The tension in St. Helena was a taut wire, humming with a frequency just beyond hearing. That afternoon, a hiker from Boulder, a young woman named Chloe who was studying ecological science, got lost on a trail above the lap. As she tried to reorient herself, she stumbled upon the blackened circle of earth where the statue had been burned. She later told anyone who would listen, her voice still shaking, what she had seen. "It was creepy, sure," she said, "but that's not it. I felt watched. Not in a bad way, just intensely. And the air was cold, really cold, like a fridge door had opened, right in the middle of this warm day. And then I saw it." She took a deep breath. Growing right up through the center of the ashes, where the fire had been hottest, was a single flower, a pure white columbine, just one, perfect, unburned. And I know for a fact columbines don't bloom in late September. They're long gone. She'd taken a picture on her phone. The image spread through the town like wildfire, the unburned columbine. It was seen as a sign, a message, a seed of hope for some, a portent of something else for others. Pastor Carter's response, when a reporter from a regional paper asked him about it, was a scoff. A weed. God sent a weed. People see what they want to see. It's pathetic. His arrogance seemed to grow with each strange occurrence, as if he were building a wall of certainty against a rising tide of doubt. That evening, he hosted a lavish dinner party at his mansion for major donors. He gave them a tour, showing off the gold leaf fixtures, the imported Italian marble, the home theater, the custom-built wine cellar. He stood on his vast deck, glass of expensive champagne in hand, and gestured to the view of the valley below, the lights of St. Helena twinkling like insignificant embers. "All this," he said, his voice booming with confidence, "is a testament to God's favor. He doesn't reward doubt. He doesn't reward fear. He rewards audacious faith. This house is a monument to that faith." As he spoke, a dry wind, the first breath of the coming Chinook, whispered through the valley. It rustled the aspens, their leaves trembling like a million silver tongues. To Maria Flores, sitting on her porch and looking up at the brilliantly lit mansion, it sounded like a sigh. To Father O'Malley, praying his rosary, it sounded like a name being called. To Sheriff Ben Walker, doing his final patrol, it just sounded like trouble. The dinner party broke up around 11. The last of the luxury cars crunched down the long, winding driveway and disappeared toward the highway. The mansion's lights, controlled by a sophisticated smart system, began to wink out room by room, until only a few exterior security lights remained, pooling against the overwhelming darkness of the mountain night. The town, exhausted by the emotional turmoil of the week, slept fitfully. It was at 3:07 a.m. that the first call came into the sheriff's office. Old Mabel Gunderson's nurse was on the line, frantic. Mabel was sitting straight up in bed, her fever gone, her eyes clear and focused. She was pointing a bony finger toward the window. "She's home," the old woman said, her voice strong and clear, "and she's brought a purifying fire." The second call came 30 seconds later. It was a trucker on the interstate, radioing in an emergency. "There's a huge fire on the mountain south of St. Helena. Looks like a house. It's fully involved." Ben Walker was already in his cruiser, his tires spitting gravel as he sped toward the Carter mansion. He didn't need the address. He could see it. A terrible, brilliant orange flower blooming on the dark mountainside. As he drew closer, the radio crackled with other reports. His deputies, the volunteer fire department scrambling, but he knew, they all knew, it was too far gone. He skidded to a halt at the security gate, which was already melted and twisted from the heat. The sight that greeted him was one of biblical horror. Pastor Carter's monument to audacious faith was a roaring inferno. Flames towered hundreds of feet into the sky, fueled by the mansion's exotic woods, its expensive finishes, its vast stores of everything flammable. The heat was so intense it forced Ben back, searing his face. The sound was a roaring, hungry monster, a cacophony of cracking timber and shattering glass. And then, something happened that Ben Walker would never, ever be able to explain to anyone, not fully, not in a way that could be written into an official report. The fire department arrived, but their hoses seemed pathetic against the colossal fury of the blaze. They could do nothing but try to contain it, to keep it from spreading to the dry forest. As they trained their water on the edges, the heart of the fire did something impossible. The flames, leaping and swirling in the thermal draft, seemed to coalesce. They twisted and climbed, not randomly, but into a shape, a familiar shape. The firefighters saw it. Sheriff Walker saw it. The growing crowd of townspeople gathering at a safe distance down the hill saw it. A collective gasp, part terror, part awe, swept through them. Against the black canvas of the night, the fire had formed the unmistakable towering figure of the Virgin Mary. Not the serene, gentle figure that had stood on the outcropping, but a figure of righteous, purifying flame. Her head was bowed, her arms were outstretched, not in welcome but in judgment. She was woven entirely of living fire, a terrifying and magnificent apparition that burned for a full minute against the sky. And then, as suddenly as it had formed, the shape collapsed back into a chaotic inferno. The mansion was gone, utterly, completely, reduced to a smoldering foundation and a heap of blackened debris. Miraculously, Pastor Robert Carter was found alive. He had been asleep in his third-floor bedroom when the fire started. He claimed he'd woken to the smell of smoke, not of wood, but of roses. An overwhelming, cloying scent of roses. He'd stumbled from his bed, disoriented, and a section of the ceiling had collapsed, blocking his door. His only escape was through a window onto a narrow ledge. He was trapped there, surrounded by flames, for nearly an hour before a firefighter's ladder reached him. He was suffering from smoke inhalation and minor burns, but he was alive. He was the only one in the house. As they led him down the ladder, wrapped in a blanket, his face was a mask of soot and utter profound shock. He was not the triumphant televangelist anymore. He was a hollow man. His eyes, wide and unblinking, were fixed on the ashes of his home. He kept muttering the same thing over and over, a phrase that was picked up by a paramedic's body cam and would later be played on news broadcasts across the country. It was her, she was made of fire. The investigation that followed was thorough. The state fire marshal, ATF agents, forensic experts, they descended on St. Helena. They found no evidence of arson. No accelerants were used beyond what was already in the home. The cause was ultimately listed as undetermined, likely an electrical fault in the brand new cutting-edge system that had somehow overloaded. A tragic accident, a coincidence of unfortunate circumstances, but no one in St. Helena believed it was an accident, and they certainly didn't believe it was a coincidence. The burning of the statue and the burning of the mansion were forever linked in their minds, two events bound by an invisible divine thread. It was seen as punishment by some, as a brutal, necessary lesson by others. For Robert Carter, it was the end of his ministry and the beginning of a long, painful silence. He checked himself into a private retreat center and was never heard from publicly again. The Crystal River megachurch was shuttered within a month, its congregation scattered. In the spring, a strange thing happened. On the blackened foundation of the Carter mansion, nothing grew. The soil remained scorched and barren. But on the outcropping, where the old statue had stood, where the earth had been salted with its ashes, a garden of wild columbines burst forth, more vibrant and white than anyone had ever seen. And in the very center, growing from the exact spot where the unburned columbine had appeared, was a young ponderosa pine sapling. Its shape, to those who looked at it with faith in their hearts, was uncannily familiar. The town of St. Helena never quite forgot the smell of smoke, or the sight of a lady made of fire in the midnight sky. The event became a part of them, a story passed down, a warning and a wonder. It was a reminder that some things are sacred, not because we declare them to be, but because they simply are. That faith is a force, like fire. It can warm and sustain, or it can cleanse and destroy. And that in the thin places of the world, the veil between the human and the divine is not just thin, but sometimes for a heartbeat, for a single miraculous moment, it is utterly and terrifyingly transparent. Thank you for joining us for this tale of faith, fire, and the echoes of our actions. If this story moved you, sent a chill down your spine, or made you think twice about the lines between coincidence and destiny, please show your support by liking this video and subscribing to the channel. Your engagement helps us continue bringing these powerful, haunting narratives to you. Until next time, remember, some stories are more than just stories.